You have been told your whole life to save money, and that advice is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. And the gap between what you were told and the full picture is costing millions of responsible, disciplined people their financial future. Here is the statement that will either resonate deeply or make you uncomfortable. Probably both. Saving money, on its own, without the step that must follow it, will not make you wealthy. It will not produce financial independence. It will not generate the kind of financial security that allows you to stop working because you choose to, rather than because you have to. In certain conditions, sustained over long enough periods, saving alone will actually leave you poorer in real terms than when you started. And the most painful part of this reality, the people it hurts most are not the careless or the undisciplined. It hurts the responsible ones. The people who were told the right things, who followed the advice they were given, who showed up every month and put money aside with genuine consistency and genuine commitment. They did what they were told, and what they were told, while not wrong, was not complete. I want to be completely clear about what this video is and what it is not. This is not an argument that you should stop saving. Saving is essential. Saving is the prerequisite for everything else. Without the habit of spending less than you earn and setting aside the difference, nothing else in personal finance works. What this video is arguing is that saving is the beginning of the process, not the end of it. That the step which follows saving, the step that converts accumulated savings into growing wealth, is the step that most people never take. Or take too late, or take incompletely. And that the absence of that step explains almost entirely why hardworking, financially responsible people arrive at retirement with less than they expected, despite decades of genuine discipline. In this video, I am going to prove to you with mathematics, with evidence, and with specific examples, exactly why saving alone fails as a wealth strategy. Then I am going to show you exactly what saving is actually for, its correct and limited role in a complete financial plan. And then I am going to give you the specific framework for what comes after saving, the step that actually builds wealth, how it works, what it requires, and how to start it today regardless of how much or how little you currently have. Saving money will not make you rich. Understanding why and what to do instead might. Let us get into it, why this matters more than most topics. Before we go through the 6 parts of this video, let me explain why this particular topic matters more than most things covered in financial education. Almost every financial mistake discussed in personal finance content is a mistake of commission, something you did that you should not have done. Spent too much, took on too much debt, made a bad investment. These are visible mistakes. They appear on statements. They produce signals that something went wrong. The mistake this video is about is a mistake of omission, something you did not do that you should have done. Specifically, the failure to transition from saving to investing. And mistakes of omission are categorically more dangerous than mistakes of commission. For one simple reason, they are invisible. The account that should have been opened and never was does not appear on any statement. The investment return that should have been compounding and never did produces no notification, no alert, no signal that something is wrong. The financial future that could have been built and is not visible until the moment of retirement when it is too late to change it. This is the silent, invisible, catastrophically common financial mistake of a generation. Not bad spending, not terrible debt decisions, just the failure to take the step that comes after saving, and the complete absence of any feedback mechanism that would reveal the cost of that failure until it is far too late to recover from it. That is why this matters. And that is why we are going to be completely direct about it. The mathematics that prove saving alone fails. Part 1. The numbers do not lie. Let me show you the mathematics directly, because this is not a philosophical argument about whether saving is good or bad. It is a mathematical argument about what saving alone actually produces over long time periods, and whether that outcome is what most people think it is. Scenario 1. Someone saves consistently for 30 years. They put away $500 every month, $6,000 per year, into a traditional savings account, earning an average of 1% annual interest. Over 30 years, their total contributions are $180,000. With 1% interest compounding, the account balance at the end of 30 years is approximately $209,000. That number sounds reasonable until you factor in inflation. At a historically moderate 3% annual inflation rate, consistent with the long-term average in most developed economies, the purchasing power of money halves approximately every 24 years. Over 30 years at 3% inflation, something that cost $1 at the beginning costs approximately $2.43 at the end. This means that the $209,000 accumulated in the savings account represents approximately $86,000 in today's purchasing power. The person saved $180,000 in nominal terms over 30 years and ended up with the purchasing power equivalent of $86,000 in today's money. They spent 30 years of disciplined saving to end up with less real purchasing power than they put in. This is not a theoretical extreme scenario. This is the mathematical outcome of 30 years of disciplined saving in a low-interest account during a period of moderate inflation. And it describes with uncomfortable accuracy the financial reality of many people approaching retirement who saved correctly by every measure they were given and still arrived at the finish line, financially underprepared. Think about two people who both begin at the same point, age 25, with no savings, and a commitment to setting aside $500 per month for the next 30 years. The first person keeps their savings in a traditional savings account at 1% interest. They are disciplined, consistent, and financially responsible by every conventional measure. The second person opens a tax-advantaged investment account and directs their $500 monthly into a broadly diversified global equity index fund. Over 30 years at historical average equity, market returns of approximately 8% per year, their contributions of $180,000 have grown to approximately $670,000. The purchasing power of that sum, adjusted for 30 years of inflation, is still substantially larger than anything the savings account produced. Same starting point, same monthly discipline, same 30 years. The difference is entirely in what happened to the saved money after it was saved. The long-term historical average annual return of broadly diversified equity markets, the stock market, in most developed economies has been approximately 7 to 10% per year in nominal terms, or 4 to 7% in real terms after inflation. This compares to the 1 to 2% offered by most savings accounts, a return that after inflation is zero or negative. The difference between these two rates, compounded over 30 years on the same monthly contribution, is not a marginal improvement. It is the difference between financial adequacy and financial independence. The conclusion from these mathematics is clear and direct. Saving is necessary, but saving into instruments that return below inflation produces no real wealth over long time periods. The step that must follow saving, deploying accumulated capital into assets that grow at rates significantly above inflation, is not optional for anyone who wants their decades of financial discipline to produce genuine financial security. Action. This week, calculate what your current savings, across all accounts, would be worth in 30 years at 1% interest versus 8% annual returns. Use any basic compound interest calculator online. See the difference clearly. Then ask yourself whether the way you are currently deploying your saved money is producing the outcome you are working toward. 3 specific ways saving fails. Part 2. The failure modes beyond the general mathematical case. There are 3 specific mechanisms through which saving alone fails as a wealth strategy. Understanding all 3 makes the case for investment and the urgency of start impossible to dismiss failure mode 1, the inflation tax. We have covered this in detail, but let me state it as directly as possible. Inflation is a tax on idle money. A savings account earning 1% in an economy with 3%. Inflation is paying a real return of negative 2%. Every year, without any visible signal or notification, the purchasing power of the money in that account declines by 2%. This is not a risk. It is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty, as long as the interest rate remains below the inflation rate. And in most environments, for most savings accounts, it does. The inflation tax on idle savings is consistent, invisible, and compounding. It works against every dollar that sits in a low-return account rather than being deployed into assets that outpace it. Failure mode 2, the income ceiling. Saving is constrained by what you earn. You can only ever save a portion of your income, and in most cases, only a fraction of that portion after essential expenses are covered. Your savings growth is capped by your income growth. But investment returns are not capped by your income. An investment portfolio can grow at 8 or 10% per year, regardless of whether your salary grew at all. The portfolio has no income ceiling. It compounds on its own returns independently of what you earn. Saving keeps you inside your income ceiling. Investing allows your wealth to grow beyond it. Failure mode 3, opportunity cost. This is the invisible failure, the most expensive and the hardest to see. Every dollar sitting in a savings account earning below market returns has an opportunity cost. Not just the interest differential, the full compound return of what that money could have produced if invested in a broadly diversified asset portfolio over the same period. That opportunity cost is not recorded anywhere. It never appears on a statement. It is the permanently foregone growth of money that was stored rather than deployed. And over long enough time periods, it is often larger than the amount that was saved in the first place. Think about someone who saves diligently throughout their 30s and 40s, putting away a meaningful sum each year in what feels like responsible financial stewardship. They keep the money in savings accounts, feeling that the security of cash is important. By their mid-50s, they have a substantial balance that looks impressive on paper. Then they calculate, perhaps for the first time, what that same money would have been worth if it had been invested in a broadly diversified index fund over the same period. The difference between the savings account balance and the investment portfolio they could have had is often shocking. Not because they made a terrible decision, but because the opportunity cost of decades of below-inflation savings, never visible on any statement, was genuinely enormous. The money they saved was real. The wealth they did not build because of how they saved it was also real. Research on retirement preparedness consistently shows that the single most common reason people approach retirement with less than they need is not insufficient saving, it is insufficient investment return on what was saved. People who saved adequately but kept the majority in low-yield savings instruments consistently arrive at retirement with substantially less than those with identical saving patterns who invested in diversified market instruments. The saving behavior was identical. The investment behavior was the differentiator. Action. This week, look at your current savings and identify what percentage is sitting in below-inflation savings accounts, beyond what is needed for your emergency fund. Calculate the opportunity cost of that amount over 10 years at 4% real investment return versus 0% real savings return. The number you calculate is what staying in savings mode is costing you per decade. What saving is actually for Part 3? The correct role we have established clearly why saving alone fails. Now, let me give saving its proper due, because it does have a critical role, just not the role most people give it. Saving has three and only three legitimate purposes in a complete financial plan. Every dollar saved for one of these three purposes is working correctly. Every dollar saved beyond these three purposes, every idle dollar beyond these specific functions, is a dollar with a better use than the savings account it is currently sitting in. Purpose 1, the emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses held in a liquid, easily accessible account, not invested, not mixed with spending money. This money has one function: to absorb unexpected expenses without disrupting any other element of your financial plan. It is insurance against the inevitable disruptions of life. It protects your investment accounts from forced liquidation. It prevents high-interest debt accumulation when life sends unexpected costs. Its return is irrelevant. Its availability and stability are everything. Keep it fully funded. Keep it separate. Use it only for genuine emergencies. Purpose 2, capital accumulation for investment. Saving is the mechanism through which you accumulate the capital that then gets deployed into investment. In this role, the savings account is a staging area, a temporary holding location, while capital accumulates to a threshold for efficient investment. The goal of saving in this role is not to produce a return from the savings itself, but to accumulate enough to deploy into something that does produce a meaningful return. The savings account is the runway. The investment is the destination. Purpose 3. Short-term planned expenses. Any significant expense planned for within the next 12 to 18 months, a property deposit, a major renovation, a planned vehicle purchase, a significant life event, should be held in stable savings rather than invested. The reason is timing risk. An investment account subject to market volatility might be down significantly at precisely the moment the planned expenditure is needed. The stability of the savings account is worth its lower return for money with a specific near-term deployment date. Everything beyond these three purposes, every dollar above the emergency fund that has no specific short-term deployment date and is simply accumulating because it feels safe, has a better place to be. Not because safety is bad, but because real financial security is not built by storing money away from growth. It is built by deploying money into assets that grow and then protecting the growing asset base with appropriate insurance and structure. Saving for your emergency fund. Correct. Saving while accumulating investment capital. Correct. Saving for near-term planned expenses. Correct. Saving indefinitely into low-yield accounts as a substitute for investing. This is where the financial plan stalls and where decades of discipline fail to produce the outcome they deserve. Multiple action this week. Categorize every dollar you currently have in savings accounts. Emergency fund, how much do you actually need? Short-term planned expenses, what specifically and when? Everything else, what is it sitting there for? Identify the dollars that have no specific function beyond feeling safe and make a plan to deploy them into investment this month. What actually builds wealth? Part 4, the real answer. So if saving alone does not build wealth, what does? The answer is clear evidence-backed and available to anyone who understands it and acts on it. Owning productive assets. A productive asset is an asset that generates economic returns independently of your direct labor, through appreciation in value, through income it generates, through the productive capacity of the enterprises it represents ownership in. A savings account is not a productive asset. It is a temporary storage vessel for money. A broadly diversified equity portfolio is a productive asset. It represents partial ownership of hundreds of businesses that employ people, generate revenue, distribute profits, and grow in value as the economy expands. A rental property is a productive asset. It generates income from tenants, appreciates in value over time, and provides leverage that amplifies the return on invested capital. The transition from saver to owner, from keeping money in storage to deploying money into productive assets, is the single most important financial transition most people can make, not because it is dramatic or complicated, but because it fundamentally changes the economics of personal finance. A saver's wealth grows at the rate of interest they receive, typically below inflation. An owner's wealth grows at the rate of return produced by the assets they own, historically significantly above inflation over long time periods. Let me be specific about what owning productive assets looks like in practice, because the concept needs to be grounded in something concrete and accessible, rather than left as an abstract aspiration. For most people, the most accessible starting point is a broadly diversified low-cost equity index fund held in a tax-advantaged account. This fund owns a small piece of hundreds or thousands of companies across multiple countries and sectors. When those companies collectively produce profits, grow revenues, and increase in value, the fund grows proportionally. The investor participates in the collective productive capacity of the global economy, without needing to select individual companies, without requiring active management, without excessive fees consuming their returns. This is not a complicated strategy. It is not a sophisticated financial product requiring specialist knowledge to access or manage. It is the simplest possible implementation of the principle of owning productive assets, and it is consistently what long-term financial research identifies as the highest probability approach to building wealth for most individual investors over most time horizons. Consider the economic reality of two people's money over a 20-year period. The first person's money sits in a savings account, earning 1% annually. In nominal terms, it grows. In real terms, after inflation, it barely holds its purchasing power or declines slightly. The money is stored safely, but it is not working. The second person's money is invested in a broadly diversified global index fund. It fluctuates sometimes significantly in the short term. In some individual years, it loses value. But over 20 years, compounding at historical average returns significantly above inflation, it grows from the same starting amount into a sum that is genuinely multiple times larger in real terms. The money did not just sit, it worked. It participated in the collective productive output of thousands of businesses across the global economy. And the result of that participation, sustained over 20 years, is the difference between financial adequacy and genuine financial independence. Historical data on long-term equity market performance across multiple countries, multiple economic environments, and multiple decades consistently shows that broadly diversified equity portfolios have significantly outperformed savings instruments, bonds, and inflation over any sufficiently long time horizon. The key words are broadly diversified and sufficiently long. Individual stocks carry significant concentration risk. Short-time horizons expose investors to temporary market volatility. But broad diversification held for long periods, the approach of an index fund investor who stays invested, has historically been the most reliable path to real wealth accumulation available to individual investors. The most important thing about owning productive assets is starting, not starting perfectly, not starting with the optimal portfolio allocation and the maximum possible contribution and complete confidence in the strategy. Starting with whatever is available, in whatever imperfect form, as early as possible, because the compound growth begins the moment money is deployed into productive assets. And every month of delay is a month of that compound growth permanently foregone. Model action this week. Open a tax-advantaged investment account if you do not already have one. Research one low-cost, broadly diversified global equity index fund from a reputable provider with an expense ratio below 0.20%. Make your first contribution, however small. Set up an automatic monthly contribution at whatever amount your budget allows after the emergency fund is funded. You are now an owner of productive assets. The transition has been made, the transition from saver to investor part 5. Making the shift. Practically understanding that investing beats saving is not enough. Millions of people understand this in principle and have not acted on it in practice. The gap between understanding and action is where financial futures are determined. Let us close that gap directly. The most common reasons people understand the need to invest but do not actually start are not primarily about knowledge gaps. They are about psychological barriers that feel like knowledge gaps. They manifest as specific concerns. I do not know enough yet to start. I need to wait for a better time to invest. I do not have enough money to make it worth starting. I am worried about losing what I have saved. The market looks uncertain right now. Let me address each of these directly, because each one is a real barrier that deserves a real response. I'm not knowing enough yet. You know enough right now to open a tax-advantaged investment account and put money into a broadly diversified global equity index fund. You do not need to understand option strategies, individual stock analysis, technical chart reading, or macroeconomic cycle timing to start. A single broadly diversified index fund, contributed to consistently on a monthly basis and left alone, is a complete investment strategy that outperforms the majority of more complicated approaches over long time horizons. The knowledge you need to start is available and simple. Start, then keep learning on waiting for a better time. We have covered this in detail in earlier videos in this series. The market timing research is unambiguous. Consistently investing, regardless of market conditions, outperforms attempting to time the market for the vast majority of investors over the vast majority of long-term periods. The better time you are waiting for does not arrive as a clear signal. Markets always have reasons to look uncertain. The cost of waiting for certainty that never comes is the compound growth of every month spent on the sidelines. Invest consistently. Do not wait. On not having enough money to start. This barrier is based on a misconception about how investment returns work. The power of starting is not in the size of the first contribution, it is in the timing of it. A $50 monthly investment started today will, in 20 years, have compounded into something meaningfully larger than a $100 monthly investment started in 5 years. The amount matters less than the timing and the consistency. Any amount is enough to start. Start with whatever you genuinely have available. On the fear of losing what you have saved, this is the most real of the psychological barriers and deserves the most honest response. Equity markets do decline, sometimes significantly. In any given year, a diversified portfolio might lose 10, 20, or even 30% of its value. This is a genuine risk that is worth taking seriously. The important context is that over any sufficiently long time horizon, 15 years or more for most investors, broadly diversified equity markets have historically recovered from every decline and gone on to produce positive real returns. The investor who stays invested through declines participates in the recovery. The investor who sells in fear crystallizes the loss and misses the recovery. The correct response to the fear of market volatility is not to avoid investing. It is to invest in a sufficiently diversified way that no single company failure or sector decline can permanently impair the portfolio, and to invest with a sufficiently long time horizon that temporary market declines are understood as part of the journey rather than as the destination. Think about the person who has understood for 5 years that they should be investing, but has not started because one or more of these barriers has felt too large. In those 5 years, a consistently invested portfolio at historical average returns would have grown meaningfully, not spectacularly in any single year, but with 5 years of compound growth operating on it continuously. The person who has not started has not just missed 5 years of returns. They have missed 5 years of the early critical compounding that produces a disproportionate share of the total long-term result. Every month of barrier-driven delay is compounding against them in the form of foregone growth. The barrier that feels protective is actually costing more than the risk it is protecting against. Studies on individual investor behavior consistently identify the primary barrier to investment as psychological rather than informational or financial. The majority of people who understand investment principles and have the financial capacity to invest but are not doing so cite some version of not feeling ready. Not ready because of insufficient knowledge. Not ready because the timing does not feel right. Not ready because the amount available feels too small. These psychological readiness barriers have a direct measurable financial cost that compounds with every additional month of delay. The investors who overcome these barriers and start, even imperfectly, consistently produce better long-term outcomes than those who wait for readiness that arrives gradually or never fully arrives. Action this week. Identify which specific barrier has been preventing you from investing or from investing more aggressively. Write it down explicitly. Then read what I said above about that specific barrier again. Then make the smallest possible concrete step past it. Open the account, make the first contribution, increase the monthly contribution by whatever amount your budget genuinely allows. One step past one barrier this week. The complete picture. Saving and investing together, Part 6. The framework that works. Let me be completely clear about the full picture because I do not want anyone to leave this video with the false conclusion that saving is bad or unimportant. The message is the opposite of that. Saving is essential. Saving is the prerequisite. Without the discipline of spending less than you earn and consistently setting aside the difference, nothing else in personal finance works. The emergency fund that protects everything else is built through saving. The investment capital that gets deployed into productive assets is accumulated through saving. The short-term financial goals that provide stability and optionality are funded through saving. Saving is the foundation. The mistake is not saving. The mistake is stopping there. Treating the savings account as the destination when it is actually the departure point. Allowing the discipline of saving to satisfy the sense of financial responsibility without taking the additional step that converts saved capital into growing wealth. The complete framework that actually works. The one that produces genuine financial independence for people who follow it with consistency over time has 4 components that work together. First, spend less than you earn and save the gap consistently. This is the foundation that cannot be skipped. Second, maintain an appropriate emergency fund in liquid savings. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses. This protects everything else and never changes in its purpose. Third, deploy everything beyond the emergency fund and short-term planned expenses into broadly diversified, low-cost investment assets, primarily equity index funds for most investors, and let it compound over the longest possible time horizon. This is where wealth is actually built. Fourth, grow your income over time and direct every increase into investment before the lifestyle adjusts. Income growth that flows into investment is the multiplier that accelerates the entire system. These 4 components work together as a system. Each one contributes something the others cannot. The saving discipline creates the raw material. The emergency fund protects the system from disruption. The investment converts the raw material into growing wealth. The income growth accelerates everything. Remove any one component and the system underperforms. Maintain all 4 consistently, and the mathematics of compound growth do the rest. The timeline on which this system produces results is measured in years and decades, not months. The early stages, the first few years of building the emergency fund and establishing the investment habit, produce modest visible results. The middle stages, years 3 through 10, produce more visible progress as the investment portfolio grows from a larger base. The later stages, years 10 through 20 and beyond, produce the dramatic compounding results that most people imagine when they picture financial independence. The system works, but it requires the patience to stay with it through the early stages, when the results feel modest relative to the effort. Think about the financial life of someone who implements all 4 components at 30 years old. For the first 3 years, progress feels slow. The emergency fund is built. The investment portfolio is growing but modestly. The income is increasing, but the amounts are not yet dramatic. By year 7, the investment portfolio has reached a meaningful size, not independence producing yet, but unmistakably real and growing. By year 15, the portfolio has compounded into something that is beginning to feel genuinely significant. The income growth of the intervening years has been largely directed into investment rather than lifestyle. By year 20, at age 50, the person is approaching a financial position where work is genuinely becoming optional rather than mandatory. Not through luck, not through an extraordinary income, through 20 years of consistent application of all 4 components of the system. Research on long-term wealth accumulation across diverse income levels consistently identifies the same pattern. People who build genuine financial independence over 20 to 30-year working careers almost universally share 4 characteristics. Consistent spending below income, a maintained emergency fund that protects their plan from disruption, persistent investment of surplus capital into broadly diversified market assets, an ongoing effort to grow income with a commitment to directing increases into investment rather than lifestyle. These 4 characteristics are not the exclusive domain of high earners. They appear at every income level, and their absence appears at every income level too, including very high ones. Action this week. Assess your financial life against all 4 components. Are you consistently spending below income? Do you have a fully funded emergency fund? Is your surplus capital being invested in productive assets? Are you growing your income and directing increases to investment? Identify the weakest of the 4 components in your current financial life. Make one concrete improvement to that component this week. Final message: saving money will not make you rich. That statement is true, and it is not meant to discourage you from saving. It is meant to liberate you from treating savings as the finish line, when it is actually the starting line. The mathematics are clear. Below inflation savings rates compound into declining purchasing power over long time periods. The opportunity cost of idle savings beyond their legitimate purposes is enormous and invisible. The difference between saving into a 1% account and investing into broadly diversified equity assets over 30 years at identical monthly amounts is the difference between financial inadequacy and genuine financial independence. Saving has three legitimate purposes: the emergency fund that protects your financial plan, the capital accumulation that prepares you to invest, and the short-term holding of planned expenditures. Beyond those three purposes, every idle dollar is paying the opportunity cost of not being deployed into something that grows. What actually builds wealth is owning productive assets. It is the collective participation in the economic output of businesses, markets, and productive enterprises through broadly diversified, low-cost investment vehicles that compound over time independent of your direct labor. This is accessible to anyone with any amount of starting capital. It requires no specialist knowledge beyond what you need to choose a sensible index fund and set up a monthly contribution. And its effect sustained over the time horizon that financial independence requires is genuinely transformative. Stop treating your savings account as the destination. It is the departure gate. The investment is where you are going. And the sooner you board with whatever amount you currently have, in whatever imperfect state of readiness you currently possess, the longer compound growth has to work on your behalf. The discipline you already have, the saving habit, the financial responsibility, the monthly commitment is exactly what is needed. The only missing piece is direction. Point that discipline toward productive assets instead of toward storage. Give it time and watch what the mathematics of compound growth do with the foundation you have already built. If this video gave you a clearer picture of why what you have been doing needs one additional step, please share it. The most valuable financial gift you can give someone is an honest explanation of why their current approach, however disciplined, is not taking them where they want to go. Subscribe to our Financial Edge for a new video every week, and leave a comment below. What is the one thing that has been stopping you from moving, from saving to investing? I read every single reply. See you in the next one.